Now, indulge me this indelicate statement, Mr. Chairman. I emit greenhouse gases. You emit greenhouse gases. The ranking member, our panelists, we all emit greenhouse gases. You can measure our emissions with a high degree of accuracy. What's difficult but not, in fact, what's difficult but perhaps impossible to measure is how much our emissions actually contribute to global warming or global cooling or other global climate changes that impact our environment.
And, you know, if I had anything to do, if I was a dictator, I'd shut down every law school. We'd be a lot happier. Be more things done in the United States instead of everybody worried about being sued. And I just think this is a lawyer's dream. What you're proposing now will be used in the courts. And that's not what we're all about. You know, you take into consideration, go back to my gas line, you know, they could say, well, it's going to add to the so-called climate change down in wherever we sell the gas. Someone didn't take that into consideration. I'm just concerned, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing, because it's another example, I think, of a continued overreach, unnecessary, not needed. Yield back.
By the way, sea level has been rising for 20,000 years. It will continue to rise. So no matter what anyone does about their emissions, it will continue to rise. It's not the inch per decade that's the problem. It's that 20 feet in 6 hours from the next hurricane. That's the problem. And that's a different kind of issue to address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the witnesses being here. And I was just curious in considering the kind of questions you've just been asked and the questions that you often get. Professor Christy, you ever feel like Galileo? You remember Galileo? The overwhelming amount of science was against Galileo. And the other scientists got money from the church. They got money from the government for their research in opposing Galileo. And yet Galileo was right, and he had the courage to stand up and say so. I know it's often said by climate fearmongers that, gee, money really dictates the kind of results. I'm curious, is it true you would have access to hundreds of millions of potential grant dollars if you would change your scientific position?
I don't consider myself a Galileo in that sense. No one has arrested me yet.
That's coming.
And
I'm on record as believing climate change to be a fact. In East Texas, where I live, it happens 4 times a year.
Do you know that 80% of all marine life in the Paleozoic era went extinct? No, was there climate change there? Absolutely. Unlike my colleague from Texas that said the 4 seasons, climate change has been happening without man for forever. Geology tells us that. Would you not agree, Dr. Christy?
oh yes, and especially about the droughts in California. That's where I started building my data sets as a native of California. And it turns out that California has experienced droughts hundreds of years long, not just 4.
Well, and we don't know a lot about ecosystems because we've gotten it wrong, particularly in Arizona. We know some of the things, but we're off on a lot of these aspects. The timetable for NEPAs, and time is money. I'm a dentist, by the way, so very calibrated. Do you know what it takes like to infinity and beyond in rural America to get a NEPA done? Would you address that, Ms. Sculfus?
So after all of these years and all of this policy and now cost to government and to free enterprise, to private businesses and individuals, we actually find out that all of that policy is based on what perhaps one could say is voodoo science. What would you say?
Well, I'd say the policy is based upon some theory that needs a whole lot of correction to it.
That the steel industry in this country is going down the tubes because of foreign competition. A lot of it is based on the price of energy to produce steel, which is a lot cheaper in China, which has no pollution controls on any of the stuff they do. And we here are trying to produce steel in a environment that protects our environment, and they don't have any of that over there. So do you take that into account when you advise
I
the
would also
president?
say that we've had an enormous energy growth in this country over the past several years that's really carried this economy, that's happened with these environmental rules and information in place. So these things can happen at the same time. We can have a strong environment and have an economic
So
recovery.
you're
in this country.
denying the fact that our friends overseas have an economic advantage over us because we are investing in our
saying that-
infrastructure to save the environment and they are not? You deny that there's any advantage to that?
I am saying that it is important here in the United States that we both have infrastructure that we build and we have energy development and we protect our environment at the same time. And the American public
So,
believes
but we
can
don't care
do both.
what the people across the globe are doing?
You did state rather emphatically and included in your written testimony that carbon pollution is the biggest driver of climate change. That obviously is debatable. It's been debated here quite a bit today. But, I want to go past that, and I want to pretend with you that carbon is arch enemy number one. And I want to talk through some of the issues in your draft because I believe, as proposed, your calorie counter will make the atmosphere fat with carbon and defeat your purpose to reduce carbon.
Just from your perspective, how large would a project really have to be before it would have a direct impact on the environment or climate change?
Well, as we calculated the number, the project would have to be bigger than the entire economy of the United States of America.
So it's not going to happen, in your opinion?
In my opinion, that would not happen. I hope it doesn't happen.
All right.
Now, obviously, weather is different than climate. Is climate definable in the absolute or the historic?
We have all kinds of information about what has happened in the past, so we have some sense about where we are at the present and what changes are, how they relate to the past.
But I think many people, when they talk about climate, they actually think of weather, so that when it was raining back when I was back in Utah and it was sunny here in the 80s, and my friends were sending me pictures of them at the beach and I was upset about it, that's not the same thing.
I think one of the real problems here is that weather events that get so much attention because of video availability and so on are somehow linked to this global climate change movement when droughts, floods, all these things have always been going on. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. All things being equal, it will cause increased warming of the atmosphere. The amount of that warming from the evidence, from the observations, is quite small.
It was very interesting for me to hear a scientist tell us, quote, we don't know if the effects of greenhouse gases, we don't know the effects of greenhouse gases on the climate. And that prompted me to just quickly do a Google search to look at what NASA has to say on the subject, and the NASA website right here says multiple studies published in peer-reviewed journals show 97% or more of the climate scientists in the world agree to a very different proposition than what we heard today, that in fact human activities and greenhouse gas emissions are contributing to climate change and global warming. So I want to congratulate the majority for finding a scientist with this unique contrarian view. I suppose if we looked hard enough, we could find a cardiologist who would tell us that chocolate cake is good for us. But when there's such an overwhelming scientific consensus, just a thought, we might want to hear scientific testimony that reflects that.
And in the minute I have left, Dr. Christy, I appreciated your building the data sets from scratch and the slides that we saw. It would be, maybe at another time, it would be interesting to take those slides farther back to 1950, 1900, 1850, and not just compare what the IPCC scientists have projected the difference in temperature would be over a 5-year period of time, but look at the temperature and look at the J curve on the greenhouse gas emissions and see how they align. And I'm sure you've worked on things like that too, but this is where the 97% of the climate scientists come down on believing that climate change is something that's real and that we have to deal with. Dr. Christy.
Okay, I would hope I could disabuse you of that 97% number. That's been debunked in several studies, so that's just not
I was
real.
just quoting my colleague. So.
Yeah, well, remember the NASA website is controlled by a specific
We're quoting
specific
NASA,
government,
yeah.
so.
Yeah.